So is this the new kid on the block? We see Grandmaster Hans Niemann from USA against 13-year-old international master Andy Woodward from USA. So this was a very interesting game here when Hans Niemann tried to take down this young international master, but things went tricky. So the game started off with the move knight f3, the Zucatot opening, and the young boy responded with knight to f6. So we see the game continue with the English Anglo-Indian defense. Nothing new here at this moment. King's knight variation, and we continue on with the game with a kingside opening from black. So we have a knight c3 and then the bishop out, of course preparing to castle. Everything standard with the move e4, and we see a fight here. So this boy sacrifices a pawn by move 4, which is an interesting thing here. By move 4 we see a pawn sacrifice and Hans takes up the pawn. So this pawn is more of a gambit, and from black sacrifices a pawn for the sake of developing the pieces earlier and having a quick development of pieces for the pawn exchange, for the pawn sacrifice. So we have this rook coming out and then defending the pawn in the center. So there's that quick attack against white, so that compensating for the pawn, and then an attack in the center. We can see that black already castled and white is struggling to castle at this moment, but of course this line is playable in such position as long as the development can be compensated with a pawn loss, rather the pawn loss can be compensated with a quick development. So we see white continuing to bring out his pieces. Hans Niemann is playing pretty well, and the game continued on with some maneuvers and standard moves here. So white chose to weaken the king side with opening up the king side for the sake of reinforcing the center, and then we see black continuing with the attacks and threats. Then we see white pushing on further with his pawns and bring out these pieces pretty fast. So we see black continuing on with the attack, and black falls back, and then white reinforces the center with the pawn pushes, and then the game continues on with a pretty striking position. So we see this pawn trying to break down the queen side, and we can see that this king is still in the center. This is a weakness for white, of course, but it's still playable at this moment. When you have the king in the center, it's not always safe for the king to stay in the center. So we see that black falls back, and then white continues to attack the queen side with it, the queen side knight. So the knight retreats back, and then white comes out boldly to further weaken putting an attack on the pawn and bring the queen from the threats of the rook. So at this moment we have black continuing on with maneuvering the pieces, and at this point there's some inaccuracy by Grandmaster Hans Niemann Mock. By instead of taking up the pawn, he probably feared some attacks on the queen. He instead just dropped back his bishop, probably trying to remain with the bishop pair, and then we see black enjoying the attack here. Black comes in pretty fast, and we can see that white doesn't take the pawn, and then the game continues on with some pretty strong maneuvers. Black takes back his pawn, and at this point Hans tries to also throw in this beautiful check and trying to expand on the king side. So the game continues. He wins an exchange here, and the game seems to be coming back to life until also black makes some inaccuracy. Black tries to grab back the pawns which are lost, but better was knight to e6, but black goes for knight takes b5. So at this moment we see black picking up the pawn, and at last white chooses to castle because of much pressure in the center. As black now tries to get much more counterplay on the queen and trying to take the pawn, black takes back and giving up that knight. But of course black was ready to take back the rook at this moment, and this was a beautiful game at this point. So we see the game is still more of not so bad on either sides, but we see the game going on into some tactical positions. Of course, we see that black has some pressuring moments on both sides, with white's scattered position and an open king. So we see that white tries to break through, trying to come back into the game. But this was, of course, a mistake. Trying to give up, further expanding and opening up the king was not the best for. Better was a4, trying to hold on the position, but giving up the king side pawn just allows black to get into the position, and now the game gets more tricky for white. At this moment, white would hold on further in such a position, but this was the mistake that probably threw hands off balance. So hands had to retreat back with the queen to e3 and holding on the game further, but threw away the game by trying to take the pawn. This was now too late for the queen to come back. Of course, this international master Andy Woodward now chooses to lock up the queen, and now the queen is now no longer into play, no longer enjoying the game on the king side. The king is now desperate to survive in such a position. Of course, now trying to survive, trying to come back. We can say that the young international master takes up the position to further stretch on the king side, and then trying to come back. Of course, the international master was first to seal up the deal here and trying to put more pressure on the king side. So the game continues on fast. Hans tries to strike back, but I believe it's really too late at this point. And at this point, we see that white is really busted. White tries to survive at this point, but it's kind of too late for. Of course, everything now white is doing is just trying to hold on, but at this point, the game is literally lost. Of course, now this was the final nail in the they call it the nail in the coffin. The final nail in the coffin, which throws white off the game. Of course, we see that white now every move comes in the tempo, and this the mate in 4, mate in 5 is inevitable at this point. So the game comes in pretty much fast and downward spiral for black. So black just follows up, and at this point, Grandmaster Hans Niemann resigned. Hans Niemann is the top seed in this field, the Junior World Championship in Mexico. He's ranked number 1 in this field, while Andy Woodward from USA also is ranked number 20. So this was an amazing game and a strange loss for white, being a very strong player. An interesting game to watch. So cheers to Andy Woodward for that great victory, and hope he does well in the continuing games. Thanks. See you.